Hey, Steve. Morning, Dave.
Good morning, gentlemen. Right on time. Yep.
Bill should be joining us too.
There it is.
Guys ready to get started?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, I'm waiting on Bill. You've got, well, we'll call the meeting to order and speak the pledge, and then we can kind of go back to our informal discussion.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Everybody's seeing there, waiting for somebody to start it.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got our special meeting for joint energy and loan review to further discuss the UTEP is MBX, and I'll I think yesterday or the day before, kind of a living document where it is, and we discussed that we'd like to add this a special meeting to give us another go through. So with that, kind of just open it up to all the attendees to go through this. No particular agenda other than going through the UTEP. We can go through it page by page. It could be easiest, you might dwell in certain areas longer than the other. That makes better sense.
Good call. Yeah.
All right.
If you want, just to kind of summary the changes that I gave here, the first page introduction is pretty much the same material. I just felt I copied some language from another UTEP. I just thought it was just plain easier reading, saying the same thing. And then we talk first about our UTEP and our pilots, and then it goes into the whole process for the pilot agreement. So I felt it made more sense to kind of talk about our property tax abatement, the sales tax abatement, more all those abatements and kind of from one to the next in one area, and then kind of follow later with what the process is. So I mean, you can change that as well, but I just try to make it flow a little bit better.
Okay, no, that's fair. I didn't personally have anything on page one. I don't know if anyone has anything on page one.
No, I think it reads pretty good.
All right, page two.
I'm looking at my phone, so I don't have it by pages. Could you just, let's talk about the section? I think I'm,
Okay, so the first section I had a comment was at the end of A, real property tax abatement, where we added in renewable energy project description. And Dave did send a note to me on this. We had discussed, right now it says it conforms with Jefferson County's policy with a rated capacity of less than 25 megawatts. We had debated lowering it to 20. I think we could also add rated capacity of less than 25 megawatts for any project that is applied for permits through ORES, because they allow a threshold down to 20. And I don't know if it's the board's pleasure that we don't want to get involved with pilots for projects that are in ORES or have that 20 to 25 megawatt number of projects that are, some are going to be permitted one particular way, which may or may not have a lot of local voice, and then others will be permitted through local planning and zoning boards, which I think we discussed, we favored more greatly. So that maybe is the first point we can dwell upon.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so as Rob's saying, the ORES process, it's mandated for 25 megawatts and above. Those between 20 and 25 have the option of opting into the ORES process.
First, for new, I think the way it reads, Dave, is existing projects, they're stuck. It's new projects that haven't yet applied for a permit through Article 10. But I don't know, I haven't found very good, I thought people that were opted into Article 10 could convert for some particular period of time, but I'm not really sure. I think the state's making rules that goes along, frankly.
My concern is, I don't think we should reference ORES. I think we should reference the 20 megawatts so that anything that's 20 megawatts or greater falls under the deviation process. I think that's our goal. So that the local taxing jurisdictions will be the ones that get to determine whether or not the ORES system has taken into account the local needs. Isn't that what we're trying to do with these larger projects? Give more voice to the local communities.
Yeah, just a question what you're saying though, Paul, and just to make sure I understand. So the ORES is mandated, 25 and above is mandated. It says those between 20 and 25 can elect to opt into the ORES process. So I'm not clear what the local determination might be.
Well, let's face it, the only we've had projects that end up being 24 megawatts, but it's 5 projects,
Right.
individual
Yes.
projects
Yep.
that are
Yeah.
reviewed independently.
Yeah.
We have no applications and have not had an application for one project of 20 megawatts or greater. I forget how big the project that Boralex has proposed in Ellisburg is. Does anyone, Marshall, do you have
I want to
that?
say we're 110 megawatts.
Yeah, I think so.
No,
No.
the Helmsfield Watertown one is 110 megawatts.
Yeah.
120, excuse me, but there's another one, they have a second project in Ellisburg,
We checked the spreadsheet.
okay? And I think that, I don't know whether that's 20 or 25. I'm okay if if we want to mention the ORES review instead of the megawatt size, I can live with that, I guess. Because when you go to the Article 10 site and see the projects that are opting to go to ORES, all the big projects are going to ORES
Right.
because it has a guaranteed timeline, where Article 10 doesn't.
19.9 megawatts.
So they're stuck in Article 10 anyway.
No, they're stuck in
No.
local zoning.
Yeah, local.
Or, 90, whatever else. Paul raises the point that if, and I don't know how to capture it, because we talked like oil, we talked about a bigger 25 megawatt project, but it was really 5 megawatt project, or whatever the next was. But yeah, we haven't received one particular project of greater than 5, have we?
Not yet.
Not a standalone. Every project we've looked at have been approved at the local level. There's been none that have been state-approved projects yet. Galoo would have been the first before they withdrew.
But what about, Paul, use oil as an example. It's a 25 megawatt project. What if, for our agency, they call it 5 megawatt project, the state qualifying, they went through ORES to gain all their permits? I think we run that risk of, we might couch it as one thing, and the state or siting authorities might couch it as another.
Well, except in that case, Rob, those were 4 or 5 megawatt projects, but they they had to be individual projects with individual interconnects for the state credits they were accessing. So to even the state looked at it as separate
And
projects.
a lot of these smaller projects are community aggregation or the Here Sun or whatever, so they're looking for different other incentives.
Right.
And I don't know Bill or anyone else, I don't want to get stuck in a loophole where we call it, 4 or 5 individual projects and somehow the state recognizes it, well, it's one 25 megawatt project, or 120 megawatt project, and it goes through, you can actually maybe even put in there where local siting authority is not utilizing. I think we need some safety valves. Our concern is where there's not local siting authority. That appears to be the main concern.
My initial thought is if we had a project and tried to manipulate the system to get a faster approval, we could always just deny the permit,
Right,
deny the application
right.
on that basis, or make them. Dave, do we have the authority if we're uncomfortable to make a project a deviation of it? Let's assume one of the 5 megawatt projects gave us concern. Could we make it go the deviation route, even though it may be in compliance with our UTEP?
Yeah, we can always, I mean, if we're gonna do something other than, I mean, if we're gonna enhance the benefits beyond what we're offering, that's a question for Justin. If we're gonna offer less, I mean, I think we have the option to offer less. I confirm that with Justin, but certainly to offer enhanced benefits, which I don't think you're talking about, would be a deviation.
Let's just say we're uncomfortable with the process.
Right.
The process, and would we have the authority to say that we're gonna let the taxing jurisdictions have the final say? Could we force a project that meets the terms of the UTEP into a deviation if our level of comfort is low on the project?
So we can rewrite the deviation paragraph, but it made a note similar to what you're talking about, Paul, putting a safety valve in there where right now it says terms which are outside of the provisions of the policy, and I was gonna say as determined by the board. And then go on further to, there's some other stuff in here about notifying the taxing jurisdiction, but right now it's loosey-goosey about if it's not listed in the policy, or if the terms are outside the provisions of the policy.
I don't know, I mean, if you look at evaluation criteria, the last one is any other pertinent reasons deemed relevant by the agency, provided said reasons are set further in writing. So if there's something that we feel is untoward about the process, we can probably cite that as a reason to deny a pilot.
I think simply put is that it's under local siting.
Was that under what, Rob?
Well, I think the main concern is that we're potentially taking in the way abilities of planning and zoning in towns to create siting authority, to follow local zoning. And I believe, no, the reason it's not mentioned is because by law, it's already supposed to have that local zoning.
Right.
So maybe that's an evaluation criteria. Projects which have not gone through local siting permit, something to that nature.
But if I can, and it mentions how, the evaluation criteria, and then any pertinent reason deemed relevant by the agency provided, said reasons are set further in writing.
That's definitely a good catch-all one. I just think again to the applicants that are, following this and reading this, if that's an important consideration for the board, and I'm only speaking for myself, it's worthy of actually having its own item.
Mm-hmm.
That local zoning has been followed. It actually starts out with saying that's the quest of our agency to make sure that we we've had local zoning followed, and
Right.
right now the state has created potentially a loophole to circumvent that. Potentially, we don't know, we haven't seen one of these yet.
So we're on the paragraph that's labeled number 2, renewable energy. project.
Yeah, and then we kind of went to Paul, we went to the area where it talks about the evaluation criteria, which is where if, at the end of 2, I think it says, excuse me, so basically just have to agree upon what threshold we want.
So, Dave, are you comfortable with Rob's comment that we, rated capacity of less than 25 megawatts for a project, seeking approval from the ORES process?
How did you want to word that, Rob?
Well, I just hear from the rest of the attendees, does anyone have any better suggestion, or do we just put it in the evaluation criteria? Because there's 2 ways to do it. We can keep it at 25 megawatts and put in the evaluation criteria that we exclude projects that didn't seek local siting authority.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a requirement anyways in our application that typically,
It is.
project has to set a site plan.
The state created this loophole that, that we either lower it to 20 megawatts or we're very blunt about the siting authority requirements being done locally.
And it'd be easier for us to lower it to 20 megawatts, in my opinion, to get it to that point.
I don't have a problem with that, because as you point out, we have not received one 20 megawatt application.
So then those that between 20 and 25, that if we don't do something for the larger project, that may just force them to do the ORES process and not go through us.
Yeah, and we're not
Yeah.
inventing a 24.9 megawatt
Right.
project and seeking, we're just saying we're gonna treat it as a deviation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm more comfortable saying under 20 megawatts than I am referencing some other outside process like ORES.
I agree, because what might happen,
They could change their process.
they can have it was Article
Yeah.
10 before, now it's ORES.
Yeah.
In 6 months, the state can have some other. I think we stick with,
I think it's easier just to change, to lower it to 20 and only just.
Yeah, okay,
anything over 20 is a
that's simpler.
deviation.
And I have a question, in terms of this UTEP, it seems like we're focusing on, more of the solar side, but, if this is renewable energy, wind should be included as well. And if I'm a developer, it seems like this is a loophole for a solar guy or solar company to come in and put 25 megawatts or more by basically chopping up the project in the, because they can put it on a 28-acre lot of different locations. They're not applicable to a wind application where they have a bigger footprint. So, do we have any concern that it looks like we're leaning more towards solar than wind?
In terms of the size we are, I've used the term renewable, not solar, so we have that flexibility to, in fact, some of the other UTEPs that other counties use refer to renewable energy projects, they say, which can be wind, solar, whatever.
And John, the incentives don't seem to be the same for, say, a 2 megawatt urban footprint that would be 20 megawatts. There don't seem to be that community aggregation that I agree that would take a much greater footprint.
I think the developer could break up their solar project, even though it's probably in their company, one big project to them, versus wind has got to have more footprint to justify it, so I don't know how they break those down, smaller projects to meet these expectations, so I'm just wondering if perhaps issues with that.
Well, and if they did that and they went through local siting authority, I guess that the safety valve we talked about as a board is that if a community wanted, say, a 50 megawatt project and it was broken into whatever, a bunch of smaller projects, the community gets a voice in this. So we do have the outlet later on to go to ORES. One of the evaluation criteria we have is as Mark said, I think it's number 15 or something, any other pertinent reason. So we could deem as an agency that local siting authority was taken away, there wasn't a hard look, following the local zoning, things of that nature. That's where the tax jurisdictions get a voice, is through us, through abatement, tax agency.
I think we also need to remember to break a project down into smaller projects. Each one of those would have to have their own individual interconnect. And that's one of the biggest nuts to crack with the local utilities, is the
Right.
interconnect.
Right.
So it's probably in their benefit not to break them down, whether it's a wind or a solar, into a smaller project because of the interconnects. I mean, if you were to talk to Oya, back when we did then, their interconnection was a huge chunk of the overall project because they had to design, get approval for it, and build 5 separate interconnections. So that's probably what's going to keep a large 100 megawatt wind or solar project from breaking down to small.
Actually add that, the renewable energy facility rate capacity less than 20 megawatts and a single interconnect. Because then it gets rid of that loophole that John was speaking about, get 5 20 megawatt projects.
I don't, no, I mean, I think the project is defined by its separate interconnect, isn't it? I mean, I don't,
Yeah. Okay.
so I don't think I think that's what we're kind of getting too granular there. On renewable energy, so in terms of John's question about wind, it's not termed solar, just termed as renewable energy. Now, some of the other IDAs will actually define, renewable energy has hydroelectric, hydro, solar, wind, whatever. But the difference so we can add that definition, just kind of make it inclusive and specifically say it's for those other renewable energy projects as well. But one difference between ours and theirs is that we're limiting, particularly for something like wind, which is going to be a larger megawatt type project, we're almost excluding one by the fact that we're limiting it to these projects under 20 megawatts, I would think, so.
I mean, I'll not that this would really happen in Jefferson County, but why not just call it an energy project? There's newer technologies coming out. What if somebody wanted to put a 10 megawatt small modular nuclear reactor in the county? That's an energy project. We do it.
I look at it this way, before that happens, we will have revisited this UTEP.
I'll probably be dead before that happens. It's 25 years in the future.
In reality, we're required by law to do periodic reviews of our UTEP.
Okay, fair enough.
Correct.
So it sounds like in number 2, we're changing 25 megawatts to 20. That's the only change that we discussed so far.
Now, do you want me to add a line, whatever renewable energy, including wind, hydroelectric, photovoltaic, and biomass energy production facilities, or just leave it?
Renewables.
Was there a definition section in here somewhere, Dave? It seemed like there was. Or not?
No.
Combine industrial and non-industrial projects. And
Okay.
then we just have renewable energy projects.
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally have a problem with that. If you say renewable energy project, put in brackets like you did up in Dustin, say IE. And the list can be, say, and et cetera. Then it's up.
That work for folks?
Yep.
Okay, page 3 is completely blanked out.
Yeah, I took that whole section, I moved it later in the document.
Okay, page 4, Paul, that starts in paragraph B, so tax exemptions and then mortgage supporting tax exemptions.
Well,
Just numbering paragraph.
I think, should we have a discussion about the term of the pilot? Under 2, we just went through the first paragraph, then we have a term of the pilot abatement schedule for renewable energy project. I had a note that do we want to limit it to a fixed payment schedule for renewable energy projects? Or do we want to have the option of doing an assessment-based pilot, so we can go one way or the other depending on the project?
Well, the megawatt fee we picked was based on the assessment, right? When we went with the 5,500?
Well, that's gonna be a discussion further down when we talk about 50% over the term of the pilot.
Yeah. Well, remember, as when we asked us that question, we're not bound to the 50%. And if we want to address our UTEP for renewable energy projects and make it a fee per megawatt, we don't have to bind ourselves to the 50%. We're shooting for about that anyways, but.
That number came roughly from a NYSERDA
Right.
recommendation.
Well, yeah, it was roughly from NYSERDA, and then with us asking for John Zakowski for that appraisal of the oil projects and those 3 various levels, and that was a committee kind of between NYSERDA's recommendations and what we saw from the revenue-based assessment is how you came up with that original fee of 5,500.
Right.
We're at, NYSERDA, I think, was between 1% and 3% of gross revenues, Bill, if I remember correctly.
Right, correct.
And we're at the upper end of that. So at $5,500. But but I don't really care what NYSERDA says a project can afford to pay. You know, it's all going to come down to, that's based upon using the wholesale cost of power in our zone. And we're in the second cheapest zone, I think, in the state. I just, you know, my concern moving forward is if we get a large project, and we constantly talk about the large project, because we have 5 of them on the schedule. What if one of these companies signs an extremely lucrative PPA with an Amazon or a Google, and all of a sudden, our flat fee may have turned into just a very lucrative abatement for them. So how do we plan, let's assume we do a $5,500 per megawatt on a large scale. They go outside a lucrative PPA with a company or somebody. How do we make it so if they do a PPA, we can capture more revenue from the project? You know, if they have a 20-year agreement, and let's say 3 or 4 cents above the wholesale cost, their ability to pay taxes and the value of that project would be higher.
We could go back, it's a good point, Paul. We could go back and look at the agreement that was negotiated with the Blue Island project, early on when it's still upstate power. Because that proposal, that agreement, if it had gone ahead, it had the 8,000 megawatts, 8,000 something per megawatt. But then there was an allowance in there for any additional sales that had increased the payment by a certain percentage.
That's my larger concern. All these big companies, and this may be where I don't understand something with the REC credits.
Right.
The renewable energy credits. If NYSERDA, I think, has already awarded three of the projects have accepted their solicitations for REC to buy their REC credits. If they buy REC credits, are they buying all the power too? I don't know the answer to that. Or are they free to put that power out on the grid wholesale, or can they put that power out to a PPA to a company? If you understand what I'm trying to say.
No, doesn't this become a moot point because, the county has their policy that they want 100% taxation. Anything over now 20 meg is going to go to deviation, so it's going to be a negotiated settlement from there anyways if they get a pilot from us.
So what you're saying is in a project that's a deviation, we could then work into the pilot.
Yes.
PPA language.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, a deviation, I'd probably use that way. I mean, not a $1 per megawatt thing. Do you have a concern with under 20 megawatts falling into, at any high level of percentage, what you were thinking about?
Me?
Yeah.
listen, all our under 20 megawatt projects, and we've done 11 or 12 of them, I think now.
Yep.
Have been community solar. And they are limited to how they can market their. So that, I don't have that concern. But if I was a Boralex or a EDF Renewables, you know, I'd be trying to market my power to an Amazon facility in Syracuse. And those type of places, or a large energy user. So, and they probably can market it well, I know you can't talk about it, but John, didn't you guys buy power at Great Lakes from a renewable project or talk about doing that?
About it, but we haven't actually done a deal yet. You know, the reality of it is this energy is not that much cheaper. That really isn't cheaper than we could buy it on the open market for. In some cases now, some of them may be different than what we've been talking to, but you know, generally these solar projects are more for, you know, to show that you're attempting to, you know, do renewable energy or support renewable energy. But at the end of the day, it's probably more cost to the business than what you could buy an open market for.
You can say it, John, it's a feel good. Want to make everybody feel good
Now,
for renewables.
From a residential standpoint, it's significantly cheaper than buying it, you know, through National Grid. But on the industrial side of it, it's not as favorable, I would say.
So the only changes we have on number 2 are, we're gonna put in brackets after renewable energy project, I or change the threshold down to 20 megawatts.
Yep.
Those are the only
Yeah.
changes that we came up with on number 2.
Yeah, and I'll just add that parenthetical phrase, you know, what we mean by renewable energy.
Anything else on that page?
No.
Okay.
And question, I guess, if we do end up doing something into the UTEP I guess the question is, from earlier discussion, do we want to include something in UTEP or insert it dealing with the larger projects at this point in time? Or just start dealing with how we're going to deal with them, but that has a deviation outside the
The
process.
larger project doesn't fall under uniform tax exemption policy, as Dave Conver said, I mean, it's a deviation. So
Right, okay, right.
however we negotiate,
Okay,
They're all individually negotiated.
each project stands on its own. I mean, it's kind of like what we're dealing with Convo. If it's a deviation, we're gonna come up with the very best deal for both parties.
Yep.
I'm good with where we are so far.
Sales, use tax exemption, mortgage reporting, that's, now D and C, and D is deviations right after that, that's new. So anything on sales, use tax, or mortgage reporting, they're all changed as far as the paragraph, numbering is changed. For lettering. Then deviation is, it was basically just moved from somewhere else, I think, Dave.
yeah, I said, so the way it was written before, it kind of hopped around. So what I've done now, before it went from our UTEP in terms of property tax abatement, then it went to deviation, then it went to the process, then it went to sales tax and mortgage recording tax exemptions. I think it works better if we're going to deal with our various abatements. So property tax abatement, then the sales tax abatement, mortgage recording tax abatement. Then what are the deviation from those typical abatements, and then what is our evaluation criteria in the process? So everything else is pretty much just moving stuff
The
around.
only comment, it's more of a clarity thing under deviation.
Uh-huh.
Or any proposed pilot agreement, terms of which are outside the provisions of the policy, I would add, as determined by the agency, shall be treated as a deviation. I think it's understood that the agency should determine if it's outside the provisions of the policy, but I feel that's just a clarification that's necessary, who determines it.
I don't disagree with you, Rob, but I think we should run that one by Justin to make sure that that's.
Yeah, and
Right.
it just seems like.
I'll insert that with a note to Justin to comment on, review on that. So here's another question for you on deviations. Right now, I mean, by law, for whatever our policy is, if we're going to do other than pro rata distribution of a pilot payment, we're required to get tax jurisdiction approval. I'm just raising the question that's kind of come up before in past issues. If we're just deviating in terms of the benefits we're providing to a project, by law, we're required to notify the affected taxing jurisdictions. Our UTEP, in terms of where we go and we actually get their formal approval, is our own imposition. So I guess the question is, do we want to keep that in there, or do we want to simply notify the taxing jurisdictions of a deviation on benefits like most IDAs do? In other words, typically we're required, the IDAs in general are required to notify the taxing jurisdictions if we're going to provide enhanced benefits to a project that deviates from their typical UTEP. Right. You know, we're one of the two that I'm aware of agencies that actually, if we're going to deviate, we go and get the formal approval of the school board, county, and whatever. So there's a plus side to that. The downside to that is the length of time it may take to process something, and you get involved in the politics. I think sometimes those local officials prefer not to have to address that and rather leave it up to the IDA. I mean, there may be some that do want that opportunity. So I just raised the question. Just we've discussed it before when it comes up to UTEP. As long as we just consciously decide one way or the other.
I'd have to think hard before we change from what the precedent policy has been.
Okay.
My initial response would be, let's leave it in. I truly believe if you have a project where there's broad community support, the taxing jurisdictions will be there to support it too.
Yep.
You know, but would we go forward? On the other side of the coin is would we go forward with the county and let's say one of the taxing jurisdictions say, we don't want you to go forward? Would we disregard a community, the elected official from any taxing jurisdictions if they're reluctant or ask us not to grant it? I doubt we would ever go.
Right. No.
We never have.
No. Yeah, I would definitely. If we did go that route of just notifying them, I think we would still give them opportunity if they wanted to actively express opposition. That is something we certainly need to take consideration of into account.
But what I'm saying is, let's say we notify the county and the school and the town and one of those taxing jurisdictions, even though we could go past them without their affirmative response, if one of them tells us we don't like it, we probably wouldn't step on them and grant it anyhow, would be my guess. But I guess I would rather not take that out at this time.
Okay.
I don't know what the others think.
I agree. I think it's written fine in that regard.
Good.
Next section is evaluation criteria. There's a few numbered items. There are quite a few catch-alls that we've discussed. Use of ag land. So I think number 14 captures that. That was the proposed project to provide a benefit, economic or otherwise. So that's an evaluation criteria. A lot of the things that we discussed have to be done during the evaluation criteria of what benefit and what cost. So that's really a whole other process that probably involves Wild and some others, how we gin up our evaluation criteria to take into account some of the things that we've identified as important for consideration. Anyone have any comments to the 15 numbered items under evaluation criteria that require modification or expansion or deletion?
The only question that I had on that was, if we determine that there's other evaluation criteria outside what's listed, I read this that we can still bring that into the mix. Is that correct?
Number 15?
Yep.
Yeah, number 15 gives us a catch-all.
As long as we notify them in writing. If we have something else, yeah.
Just want to confirm that's what that means, that let's say we determine that something outside those other 14 is of importance to the agency and the project, we can ask for that or use that in making a determination.
Yes.
Okay.
And the 14 are pretty broad anyway. Again, every project's a little different. F as in Frank, pilot agreement approval process. So I think, Dave, this just takes us through the steps.
Yeah, I didn't make any changes here. I just moved it.
Earlier.
Yeah.
So really nothing in here, was much of it or any of it changed from what we moved earlier in the
Let's see.
application? It reads about the same.
Yeah.
Might have a few words here and there. We go through the public hearing threshold, we go through.
Yeah, I don't think I made any substantive changes here. I may have just like fixed a word here or there.
We need to have an application, we need to notify tax and jurisdiction according to GML section. We can change the distribution if we discuss and get agreement from the tax and jurisdictions. And then the local labor. Was the local labor part added in a little bit more strongly as we discussed in our last meeting? Was that going to be the evaluation?
Not yet. I've got to work on that yet. And that's in our application where they sign the application, what they're agreeing to.
I wonder again, does that rise to the threshold of it's important enough? Should that be a numbered item in the evaluation criteria? Or does it fall into something? Quasi 4 talks about jobs created or retained, but
I think it would fall in that, yeah.
That's more of a real property improvement, industrial.
I think it falls I think that falls into the jobs section, number 4.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it also falls under other
Yeah.
criteria to be important, but
Yeah.
it seems like that's going to be something
Yeah.
that is important in every time.
Yeah.
We're at least going to ask the question, it needs to be in the application, a little bit more forefront, but yeah, if you want to make a note about that, and that's an area that we had a good presentation from Lena and Carpenter, excuse me, not Lena, no, Carpenter's Union and Electrical.
Yep.
It definitely rises to the forefront that we ought to state it a little bit more clearly. Because these benefits, especially for renewables, really create no permanent jobs, construction jobs, whatever other benefits they create for the community. And that's our sole evaluation criteria. I'm just gonna put an asterisk next to number 7, and then you can look around with what some alternate language might be, if any.
Are we,
Really then just ending it, to recapture benefits, effective date and amendments. The effective date will be whenever we agree upon this. Recapture benefits is pretty, we have our own recapture policy with, was the intention to review that again, Dave, in consort with the UTEP, or that was just reviewed, I think, last year?
Yeah, we review that annually anyways, yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
so that I thought was updated, that goes through coverage.
Yeah. And I will just point out under the process, that on our earlier discussion about local siting approvals, I mean, number 2 and 3 talk about our pilot contingent upon the applicants agreeing all approvals required for the project from the impacted jurisdictions, and, the whole seeker and environmental stuff being done as well.
going back to the labor?
Yeah.
On our applications, are we asking for payroll?
No, but we'll need to fill that into the agreement. That's what we'll have to work on this new policy, is having them, substantiate, that payroll and such like that. So,
Because
I was under the impression.
they should be all legal, employees. There should be no
right.
illegals working on, under the table on these projects,
Yeah.
which I won't say it was.
Well, every project we send benefits to after the end of this year, is going to be a posted rate project. Is that over, every project over 1 megabyte, correct? Over a threshold, megawatt.
I forget what the threshold is.
There's a prevailing wage rate that then begins.
It's over a dollar amount.
Yeah, that,
Is it over 100,000?
the state has, so the state hasn't, the state has still come up with how that's gonna work. They haven't even set up the, remember, part of that prevailing wage rate thing, they're setting up some kind of authority or committee or board that's gonna oversee that process. But it's for projects that are over $5 million in cost and that receive more than 30% in public money as part of their financing.
Right.
So
So,
that doesn't impact any projects we're dealing with right now.
This concern really applies to not just renewable energy, and Rob Aiken is familiar with this as well. I mean, if you go build, you know, a hotel, a shopping mall, whatever, you can hire some contractors that just open shop in some other town. If they have to pay a posted wage, it doesn't mean they have to give benefits to the local union. So I know the unions asked for some assistance on at least some assurance that local companies, local unions were given an opportunity. But at the end of the day, the company that won the project had its bottom line as well. So I think that's always going to be the balancing act, and we definitely would like to see some level of proof that I don't think the state's going to police it, but how the posted wage is being administered and the fact that they are in fact, Paul brought up a simple thing, payroll by zip code. It doesn't disclose people's names or anything of that nature, but it gives us an idea of where the pay is going.
Yep.
Basically,
Well, that would be part of, it was explained as I brought that up in the past, that type of requirement would be in the project agreement, not
Right.
in the pilot agreement. Is that correct, Dave?
Yes.
So we can
Okay.
still work those type of requirements on reporting to us in the project agreement. But I believe anyone that has, all these projects that have received rec credits, the state is requiring them to pay posted rate, period. So if you read their agreements. So that should give the local shops a chance to bid on the projects or have a fair shot at getting their employees or their members on a project. It's gonna push up the cost of all these projects and any projects in the future of the other types. How's that gonna affect Convolve, Dave? Or have we got far enough along that they aren't gonna fall under that?
Well, considering the size of the investment as it moves forward, they're not getting 30% benefit. So, I mean, it would be over $5 million project, but they wouldn't be exceeding that 30% public financing role, I don't think.
Unless the state requires it for some of the credits they're giving.
Yeah, perhaps.
But wouldn't we be signing deals way before that
Yeah.
would kick in?
Yeah.
If it lasts that
Well,
long, I think Gary would.
And they're primarily, I mean, it's primarily construction, for a manufacturing facility. They may, if they do the solar project, it may be primarily to supply their own energy there for that plant.
Behind the,
So
Rob Aiken, question for you on the posted rate thing. You may have to deal with it more often. If you pay a person a posted rate, you don't actually have to hire a union employee, is that correct? So you can pay the posted rate of your state payroll benefits, but not necessarily union fringes. Posted rate come along that you have to pay union fringes as well.
Prevailing wage is needed to give, if this is the question you're asking, give union shot at it, or an electrical contract uses union labor, a better chance to get those projects. But as you mentioned, or someone mentioned, that the requirements, that you're 30% state.
30% public. So if they get state financing, if they get IDA assistance, if they exceed 30% in public financing for the project, benefits.
Okay, I guess I have to read that because the way I thought I understood posted rates were, if the base salary is $30 an hour, you have to pay everybody $30 an hour, but you don't actually have to hire a union employee. You might eliminate 15 to $20 an hour of fringes, and you're
No.
paid payroll benefits,
They-
50% in every dollar.
It depends on the contract, right?
Correct.
Rob, the fringes are all, when you go to the rate, you don't have to have a union person, but you gotta pay the hourly rate plus the fringe rate. So you have,
And that's the part I couldn't recall.
Yeah.
So basically, they're forcing all open shop contractors to behave as if they were a union contract.
yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the part I wasn't
But they're used,
entirely certain of.
they're used to, they're used to those arrangements.
Okay. Yeah, I think to Paul's point that every single one of these jobs went up 25 to 30% price.
Well, it could get worse. I don't know. I've also heard that there's some lobbying for the system a year or two ago. Proud Park did that anything the state touches, anything could be considered prevailing wage project.
They've been trying to do that for a while.
I don't know how far.
Anything that what touches?
Yeah.
Anything the state touches.
Oh, yeah, they have tried that, yes.
they've been trying that for a long time, anything the IDA or anything like that, they've been working on that for a long time.
There's a legislator down in
Yeah.
Newburgh area.
Yeah.
And maybe these thresholds they put through on this latest legislation is a way to finally get something through.
Okay, yeah, I mean, if they're paying fringes to the local, that's all, they're gonna be contributing to their pensions, health and welfare, and then also their training programs. So at least those are some benefits that do come back somewhat regionally, but also a fit in action. So it's really another consideration. Okay, we already went through recapture benefits, and then the last paragraph is the effective date amendment. That's kind of the whole policy is really getting a better cost benefit analysis, shape on eking out some of the costs and some of the benefits that we talked about, ag land, local contractors, et cetera. And the application that Congress brought up, some things to improve or add to there, so I know those will take place, shortly after you give this move it to the full board.
Yeah, I'll run this, I'll make the changes suggested, I'll note those to Justin, have him review it, and then we can get it to everybody back for a final review.
Okay. Dave, when we put the UTEP in front of the full board, should we delay it and actually update the application at the same time? So we kind of read them in concord, because it seemed to work together.
Well, we can work, when we have to, when the board approves it, we actually have to put a 90-day notice out there for the taxing jurisdictions to review and give them an opportunity to comment, so.
Well, we need to do that before final approval, before our final.
For final approval, yeah, so so I guess the question is if we have Justin review this and get it for the next board meeting, if you want to proceed at that point, then we can start working on updating the application during that 90-day period, so.
So what we'll do at the board
I
meeting,
don't think there's a lot in the application that wasn't updated less than 5 years ago. There's a couple of new things that have come forward, especially about the local labor. And I know we always struggle a little bit with some of the cost benefit analysis, and we're using the standard one that's provided by the state. But I'll be honest, it's very hard to understand many times. I like Lyle's little snapshot one more so than the actual output from that program. I find it very hard to follow that.
so what we'll do, Rob, is, once we get this back from Justin, we'll get it all to all the board members, and then at our next meeting, if everybody agrees, then we'll have a motion to send it out to the municipalities for their 90-day review. Then our final would be come after we've given them their 90 days to comment back to us.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, good.
Right.
Anything else from anyone? We're right on schedule. We got 5 minutes, and I think a couple people had some hard cutoffs at 9.
I just one quick question, because we keep, coming up about how we're gonna deal with these large scale projects. Do we want to wait till we get one coming before we start negotiating something, or do we want to start meeting, or the energy committee start discussing how we might handle these?
I mean, it would make sense, the reason you form the energy committee is to kind of come up with, I'll call it policy for consideration, so it would make sense for the energy committee to bat around, I guess, the evaluation criteria that we would use for a large scale project.
Okay. All right.
That's my opinion.
All right. I'll share, I'll get something separately. I'll send a note out to the energy committee. I'll copy the rest of the board too, just what we're hearing about how other ideas are starting to address the large scale projects, and then we can organize, we can schedule a meeting later.
Is it worthwhile if you put the energy committee on this task? And I don't want to make it sound like we're evaluating particular projects, but there's a couple we know a little bit more about. Is it worth actually looking at an example one similar to something that's going to come before us? Or is that too close to evaluating a project? We don't want to do that.
I don't know. I think the first thing we need to do is have another meeting on Jay's concept.
Yeah.
Talk about that. I'd like to hear, I mean, Justin sent an email the other day that had a lot of information that I know I hadn't heard of as it related to another county. I'd like to see if your association, Dave, has anybody finalized an agreement with a large scale solar project?
Not that I'm aware of. I talked to Livingston County yesterday. They are beginning negotiations with a large scale project now.
It'd be nice to know County X.
Yeah.
I'd like to know what the developers are putting on the table in these other counties, if they're in a position to share that with us, so we know what we're gonna be facing. You know, we put out our number of $5,500 a megawatt as a starting point.
Right.
How's that gonna fare in other areas?
Yeah.
You know, compared to projects in other areas, it'd be nice if there was like a data gathering of all the IDAs, like who has large scale projects, where they are, have you had negotiations? What range are the developers looking at? What range are you looking at for payments? Just so that there's not a divide and conquer mentality by all these developers. I'll let one go out in this county, get their own little deal, and everyone else is working elsewhere.
Right.
It'd be nice to know what others are doing.
All right, we'll continue to dig up some information on that.
Have we heard any more about the uniform appraisal process from the state?
No, I haven't heard anything, seen anything.
I mean, that's gonna be important too, right, Paul?
Personally, for me, I think that's a huge, I don't see how we can enter into any negotiations till we know what we're dealing with in that realm. But they had 180 days to set that criteria. I'm sure once they put out their draft, the Assessors Association will go, the county and the assessors across the state are gonna know about it, and then we'll hear about it.
Yeah.
So,
But I do agree.
my personal opinion is that's gonna be a huge thing as we sit there. If we're gonna leave 50% in over 15 years, you know, this is gonna give us an idea whether the number is higher or lower than where we are right now.
Yeah. Right.
Personally, I'm not interested in going lower on the large scale.
No.
All right, so for back to the UTEP, and we've got a secondary to look at large scale, as well as finalizing our concept on agricultural use, cost and benefit. So on the UTEP, Dave, you're gonna run it, so
Yep.
that means past Justin, and then at some point we'll get it in front of the full board.
Yep, I'll shoot to get it to the next board meeting, full board, so we at least get the 90-day thing going. So.
Anything else from any of the attendees? Otherwise, we can just call the meeting closed. You know, a couple people had cutoffs at 9.
I'm gonna be real quick. I talked to Katie Malinowski on Friday and I sent an email to Dave. Are you gonna talk to Katie about that concept?
Yeah, she was out yesterday, so we left it. I'll talk to her today or tomorrow. I'll try to reach out to her. So I think it's a great idea. Paul talked about doing a workshop with John Zukowski for local officials and how these projects would work.
Supposedly, he just did one for Cornell University that Katie attended. It was a webinar that was very good. And the thought was to do that for all our local elected officials and assessors in the Tug Hill. You know, Katie's involved, doing it for everyone in the Tug Hill agencies realm that are interested. I mean, we're constantly batting off, you know, elected officials or assessors. Particularly, I've dealt with some assessors that are lost on how to proceed. So I think it would be good. The assessors are working real hard to get a handle on it.
Yeah.
And we've had good conversations with them, but I think anything we can do to educate elected officials and assessors on how to deal with these projects would be beneficial.
Yeah, I think us being a sponsor or something like that makes a lot of sense. So, all right, I'm actually chairing the next conference call, so I have to get on.
All right, well, I'll call this meeting to close, and we'll talk at the next board meeting, I guess.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Everybody stay safe. Wear your mask for one more day.